Well, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. We'd like to welcome you to the Reed and Christine Holiday Executive Lecture Series, and thank you for being here. I think you're in for a real treat today. We've got a couple of special guests in addition to our speaker today. With us are, of course, President Holland, whom you recognize, and Vice President Mark Archambault, who you may not recognize because he's about as new as I am. So we're grateful to have them with us today. I think today we're extraordinarily privileged to have with us Mr. Rodney Hawes, Jr. from New Canaan, Connecticut. Mr. Hawes is a distinguished military graduate of Stanford University, not a bad little school out in California. And then he obtained an MBA from Harvard University, not a bad little school out in the East somewhere, where he was a Baker Scholar, which is a very prestigious scholarship there. Mr. Hawes has many ties to Utah, and currently he serves as a member of the National Advisory Council at BYU's Marriott School of Management, and he's also a member of the Board of Dean's Advisors at the Harvard Business School. Mr. Hawes served as chairman and CEO of Life Re Corporation from 1998 until the New York Stock Exchange listed company was sold. Also, I'm not sure this date's quite right, to SWIS RE in 1998. This organization was the largest independent life reinsurance company in the United States. In addition, he founded the Insurance Investment Associates of New Canaan, Connecticut in 1972. The Insurance Investment Associates specializes in the merger and acquisition of insurance companies, and hopefully we'll get a taste of those a little bit as he speaks today. He also has some entrepreneurial interest, including investments in computer software companies, a consumer products company, and real estate. And then a name that all of you will recognize, and if you haven't recognized, you need to get out, open your wallets, and spend a little bit of money there. He and his family are currently developing the Five Guys Burger and Fries franchises in several western states. If you feel in need of a few calories, hop over there. They're absolutely wonderful burgers and fries. I can vouch for them. Mr. Hawes also currently serves on numerous boards of directors and advisory committees, including W.R. Berkley, the Fortune 500 New York Stock Exchange-listed insurance company. Mr. Hawes and his wife Beverly are active in funding various philanthropical projects, which focus primarily on opportunities in the fields of education and health. Scholarship programs rewarding excellence at BYU's Marriott School of Management, Southern Virginia University, and BYU Idaho are typical. Hawes Hall, a new building at Harvard's School of Business, was dedicated in his honor in 2002. And we welcome and are very grateful that you've made the effort to travel and speak to us today, Mr. Rodney Hawes, Jr.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I came by here a few years ago, and here you are. I mean, 30-some thousand of you. It's pretty impressive to a guy from a small town. I grew up in southwestern Idaho, a little town at the time of about 400 people. When I went to school in California, there were more people in my dormitory than were in my town at home. It was a bit of a shock. But you can survive coming out of these great little towns, and you learn a lot. And as a result, today I'd like to talk to you. I've entitled my talk, Remember to Make a Difference. And I hope by the time we get to the end of it, you'll understand what I mean. Make this world a better place when you leave it than you found it. I'd like to tell you about a friend of mine. His name is Sir Ronnie Cohen from England. But when I met him, he was Ronnie Cohen. I met him at the Harvard Business School when my wife and four children had journeyed to the East Coast to take part in an MBA program there. And Ronnie had just come from England. But as we got acquainted, we were in the same section. They divide the class into sections, and for the first year, you're in the same group of about 90 kids 3 times a day, every day, for the whole first year, so you get very well acquainted. One day I learned how he happened to be there. He grew up, he was born in Egypt of Jewish parents. His father's family had, for generations and generations, for hundreds of years, been from the Middle East. His father was a very successful businessman. In the 50s, I think it was 1956, the Muslim folks who were controlling the government decided, and you may know this, that at least if you read your history, the French controlled Egypt and the Suez Canal. And in 56, I think it's 56, they threw the French out. And they were so successful at throwing the French out, they decided they'd throw all the Jews out too. So Ronnie Cohen, 10 years old, they take over his father's business. They gave him each, they could take one suitcase and leave everything else behind. His family was lucky because his mother had an English passport, and hence they went to England. Now, Ronnie Cohen didn't speak any English because he spoke French at school and Arabic in the community. But Ronnie Cohen was a very smart young man, and he studied hard, made it into Oxford, where he ultimately became the president, or the whatever they call the designated leader of the debating society, which is the most prestigious thing you can do practically at Harvard or at Oxford. And from there, then he moved on to the Harvard Business School. When he graduated from the business school, he went back to England, and he and a couple of guys started a venture fund, and he grew it into the largest venture fund in all of Europe. Very successful. Recently, I saw him, we sat on a board together at Harvard, and I asked him what he was doing since he's essentially retired now. And I said, "What's this Sir Ronald Cohen business all about, Ronnie?" And he blushed a bit and said, "Well, someone decided that I had done some good trying to help some of the poorer people in England, and so I was knighted by the Queen, and I was quite honored by that." I said, "Well, what are you doing now?" Then he told me something very interesting. He and some guys put together a fund, a social investment fund, and he said this: the Palestinians are never going to get out of the mess they're in until they become successful in supporting themselves. These government handouts and these things that other countries have been trying to do for years, they don't work. And so we decided that if we could help the Palestinians and loan them money at a reasonable rate that would help them develop their own businesses, then they can dig their way out of this thing, be proud, self-sufficient, and move on their way. I found that fascinating, that the second generation from some of the very people in that part of the world who'd thrown his family out when he was 10 years old and all he took was a suitcase, that he had the compassion and the interest that he would go back and help those folks. But you don't have to be rich to make a difference. I don't want to give you that impression. Over the mountains here in Montana, a fellow named Greg Mortensen lives. Now, in his younger years, he was a trauma nurse in emergency rooms in the Bay Area. He liked that because he liked helping people through the emergencies, but the other reason he liked it, it gave him great flexibility because he really liked to climb mountains. He had climbed the mountains all over the world a number of times, and his latest work a few years ago was to try to climb K2, the killer mountain in the Himalayas. It's about 28,000 some odd feet. It's about 3 times the height of Bald Mountain in Deer Valley. The air is pretty thin there. He and a group of international climbers were climbing it. It was his first time. He wanted to make the summit. They got within 600 meters of the summit, and the Frenchman that he was with became quite ill because of the altitude. So he and another fellow volunteered to take the Frenchman down the mountain to a lower level where the helicopters would be able to get in, because they can't deal with the super high heights because there's not enough air to support the helicopter. And so while he was within 600 feet of making his goal that he'd had for many years, he takes his friend down the mountain. to where the helicopter got him. He was then too weak to make it himself, to go back up the mountain. So what does he do? But he says, well, I better go down the mountain then, because I don't feel so well myself. There was a snowstorm. He got lost. He was found by a guide who pointed him in the right direction. He got lost again. He stumbled into a village, a Muslim village. If he hadn't gotten there then, he would have died. They took him in. They took him into their home. They nurtured him back to health. It took quite a period of time. And while he was there, he noticed that they had no school. And how he noticed it was that about once or twice a week, the government would send in a school teacher. They paid about $1 a day for, and they would give some lessons. And the students then, if it was math, would take a stick and do their math problems in the dirt. And he thought, these folks have saved my life. The least I can do is build them a school. They figured out it cost about $12,000 to build a school. So Greg Mortensen, who's been befriended by these wonderful people, he tells them he's going to do that. He's got to go home and raise the money. So he goes home and he raises $12,000. It was a scramble for him because he didn't really have any money. And he comes up with it. He goes back over to build the school. And the village elders say, well, that's great. The problem is what we really need is a bridge. We need a bridge over the canyon, and because it's hundreds, if not thousands of feet down on either side. We couldn't even get the materials really in that we need to really do a good job to build a school. And so he said, well, okay. So they build the bridge. He goes back home and raised another $12,000. Anyway, I could spend a lot of time on this, but to shorten a long story, let me tell you, Greg Mortensen, trauma room nurse in emergency rooms, has now built 130 schools in that part of the world. He's made more friends for the Americans and in these Muslim villages than anybody could possibly have ever imagined. You don't have to be rich to make a difference. About 2 or 3 years ago, my wife and I stumbled into a situation where some folks from Arizona and a couple from here in Utah decided that they would see if they could do something about the educational problems in South America. The the per capita income in the United States, if I remember, is something around $37,000 a head, a person. In Mexico, it's like $6,000. Whereas on Honduras, it's $970 a year, and in Nicaragua, it's about $730 a year. That's $2 a day. No wonder they have trouble with education and moving along and getting jobs. It's dirt poor, literally dirt poor. If they didn't have the great weather they have, that they have the fresh fruits and vegetables, I don't know what would happen. Anyway, these folks decided that rather than have schools from kindergarten to high school and college, that they could help rescue and create a middle class, business, if you will. And so they said, if we can gather students from 17 to 35, teach them English, accounting, something about computers, when they come out, they can get a job. And they added one more thing, teach them how to drive, because none of them have cars, obviously, they can't afford a car. And lo and behold, they said, well, we just need to raise a few dollars so we can start these schools. My wife and I decided we would help with the one in Nicaragua, and we've done that, and it's now wide open and going great. The students, and here's a lesson to learn, can't pay tuition, they have no money. But what they can do is render service. And so they give them an opportunity, and they'll get a widow's house or some other situation. They'll supply the wood and the things they need to finish it, and they jump in and they earn their way into the school. And then they spend their 10 or 11 months, and when they come out, they've virtually joined the middle class. We think that's making a difference. Now, let me tell you a story. It's kind of embarrassing in a way. After we graduated from business school, we moved to New Canaan, Connecticut. Now, my wife is from Boise and went to a fine college called Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, and she's a very fine pianist and is rather sophisticated, and took in this country boy for see if she could shape me up, I guess. And we were living in New Canaan, and she mentioned one day it would be really good for us if we'd go to a symphony. And Lincoln Center in New York City is only about an hour away from us. And so we made arrangements to go to the symphony. It was on a Friday, and I was concerned about traffic because you never know what you're going to run into. And so we left very early. We were so early, in fact, that when we got there, and we had nothing else to do, so we went on in and sat down. They hadn't even set up the chairs. So we get there, and we're sitting in the balcony looking down. It was fascinating, really. The custodians came and swept the stage, and then the other people came and they set the chairs up and the music stands, and then one by one the musicians would come in and take the instruments out of their cases, and they'd start tuning up. And believe me, that's a sound, because they're all doing their own thing. I think that's probably to make you really appreciate the music when they all play the same thing at the same time. I'm not sure, but anyway, about the time this is going on, I see a young lady come walking across the stage carrying the music. She goes over to the piano, and I brilliantly say, the pianist. She puts the music on the piano and turns around and leaves. A few more minutes go by, and pretty soon everybody's ready. The conductor comes in. The young lady comes in and sits down right by the piano. And the conductor announces the guest artist for the evening is to be the pianist, and he names her name. And in comes this beautiful lady, somewhat older than the one I had thought was the pianist. And she's introduced as the guest artist of the evening, and she comes in this beautiful gown and sits down at the piano, and the conductor turns around and starts. Music is fantastic. Beverly was absolutely right. I needed this. We're going along, and all of a sudden, I see the young lady sitting by the piano reach up and turn the page for the pianist who's doing her thing. I said, "You see that, Beverly?" She said, "See what?" I said, "See the young lady by the piano?" About that time, she reaches up, turns the page again. "See?" "Well, yes." She's the page turner. She's very important. She gets out the program, shows me that it's so important, she's even listed in the program. I said, "Well, you know, if she does that wrong, it's going to mess up the whole thing." And then I got to thinking, what about the custodians? What about the guys and the people that set up the chairs and the music stands? What if they'd put up one that was broken? What if one of the chairs collapsed? And I start down this path, and I said, "Beverly, do you ever think about it?" And pretty soon she says to me, "Why don't we talk about it on the way home?" But it dawned on me, and this is the lesson I want you to learn. It's a lesson I learned that night. There are no unimportant people in any organization. If they're unimportant, they're unneeded, in which case you do something about that. That has been one of the most valuable lessons I've ever had, and I hope you learn that one. Because sometimes we come out of these universities with this little piece of paper in our hand, and somehow we think we're smarter or better than other folks. And I can tell you this, that there are many, many occasions when the people in the trenches that have a degree in common sense can be the most valuable people you can have in your organization. Now, I put together a short list. I'll run through it quickly. It's called 16, where to go? 16 business lessons learned by Rodney Hawes, entrepreneur, over the last 50 years. That's just so you have some inkling to know how close to 100 I am. I'm going to run through them quickly. If anybody has need for them at some point, I'd be happy to give you a copy. I don't think they're that brilliant, but they do cover some things that I've learned the hard way in many cases. First lesson for an entrepreneur is face reality, don't live in fantasy land. You and only you are responsible for your future. Don't expect divine intervention to constantly save you. 2, if it's your business, be there. No one will look after your business like you will. If you don't look after your business, there will soon be no business to look after. Be very careful about delegating so much that you're not on top of it. 3, and this is important in this day and age, don't be overly impressed by financial projections generated by computers. Challenge all of the critical assumptions supporting the input. I have whole file drawers full of so-called conservative projections on businesses which later failed or faltered. I might also say that I have never gotten a projection from anyone in the last 40 years that they didn't label conservative. I mean, it's unbelievable. Okay, startups are always, get this one, kids, startups always take longer to become profitable than expected and take much more capital than originally planned. One of the reasons I'm here this week is to refresh the bank accounts of a couple of businesses that were supposed to be up and over the hill 2 years ago. 5, the financial numbers of any deal, of course, have to be right, but the long-term success of every deal ultimately comes down to the quality of the management involved. 7, or 6, just because a person is intelligent, honest, truthful, morally clean, and reverent, do not assume that he or she has good business or financial judgment. There are a lot of wonderful people that just are not good at business. You'd love to have them over for Sunday dinner, but not necessarily give them your checkbook. Number 7, if a proposed deal is too good to be true, avoid it like the plague. There's no Santa Claus, there's no free lunch, and the greedy usually end up hungry. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. And later, if we have time, I can give you several instances of that. Number 8, making money comes by leveraging 3 things: money, people, and knowledge. Sometimes all 3, but certainly at least one of those at any time. It's the only way you can make any money. Number 9, the major financial rewards of even successful startups rarely go to the original founders. 10, it's generally less risky to buy a going business and to build it than to start one from scratch. Example, my boys and I have the Five Guys Burgers and Fries franchise rights for Utah, Idaho, Oklahoma, and 8 counties in Northern California. We're going to build over 100 of them. We've got 14 up now. But it was started 25 years ago by a fellow and his sons. That's why it's called Five Guys. He spent all those years figuring out how to do it. Rather than us learn how to do it from scratch, we just picked up from there, and we were profitable day one, store one. Number 9, number 11, always control the checkbook. If you really want to know what's going on in a company, analyze the checkbook. Follow the cash is a simpler way to put it. Where did the money go and why? Accountants can often report bookkeeping profits, called GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, which isn't necessarily the cash, while the company's actually going broke. Of all the things on the list, that's one of the most important ones. Number 12, you will often learn more from your mistakes than from your successes. So discover your mistakes, admit them, then move on. One time I bought an insurance company in Florida. We put a bunch of money in put it in the authorized but unissued stock to prop up the balance sheet at the end of the year. 30 days later, the actuary came along and said that the reserves were short and had wiped out all the money we'd put in it. Now, I had a choice. I had some partners in this thing. I loaded my family up. We moved to Florida to fix it. Some people would have just walked and said, too bad, and moved on to the next one. I learned more during that experience than I did all the time in graduate school. And it took me a year and a half to get it fixed. Make the customer first. Honest service. I learned this lesson from a local fellow. Beverly and I, a few years ago, built a new laundry room. So to honor my wonderful wife, I went out and bought the fanciest, most expensive washer and dryer you've ever seen. And it was terrific, except it didn't work. And we were frustrated with it for a while. And so one day I said, we got to trash these. We'll go get some more. So we went to another place, a place called Albano Electric, a little bitty place in a little bitty town that's third generation running it. Fred Albano's running it. His grandfather had started it way, way, way back. They sold appliances and did a little electrical work. And we'd bought some things from him before, but not this. I went in and I said, Fred, I'm embarrassed to tell you what we've done. And I told him what happened. I said, we want to buy some new ones. We want to buy them from you. He said, doesn't sound right. Those are very fine machines. So he gets in the car, comes over in his coat and tie, takes off his coat, goes in the laundry room, fiddles around in there, says, they've hooked them up wrong. You don't need new machinery. I said, what do I owe you? He said, nothing. One of these days you'll need something. You'll be back. And believe me, we've done 4 kitchens and 4 more laundry rooms since. And guess who got all the business? And guess why this little bitty town just over the line in New York State does such business and has done it for 3 generations? Because they know how to give service. Persistence, be patient. An example, I used to be primarily in the merger and acquisition business of insurance companies. I called on a guy in Jackson, Mississippi for 17 years. I made a deal with him. I'd go see him every year and I'd say, Bob, no one will ever know I've been here, but one of these days you're going to want to sell this company. His partner was one of the folks who owns the New York Jets, and it was an oil company guy, and he was a banker. One day my phone rings. 17 years. Rodney, I'm ready. I jump on the first plane, I go down and negotiate a deal, and I sell the company to some people from South Africa. Just as an aside, just as we were about to wrap it up, we got sidetracked because somebody came along, kidnapped his wife, and she disappeared, and we couldn't close for a period of time. And then we finally got it worked out. A wonderful guy. 2 quick things. You earn your money in your own business and you lose it in someone else's. That's what my dad taught me. I should have listened more carefully. I wouldn't be having these problems this week with these other 2 companies if I'd listened to him. You earn your money in your own business and lose it in someone else's. The last one's be alert to opportunities and seize the moment, and that's the 5 guys' experience. There are sometimes some things will come along, you just got to jump on them. And I've never been in the hamburger business, but I've been in the eating business a long time, so that seems to work out. In terms of leadership and managers, let me give you 10 or 12, or about 10 or 11 things. Protect your credibility, your integrity, your reputation, and your credit. These are your most important personal assets. They take years to build, but only moments to destroy. Never, ever, ever compromise your integrity. If you're in a situation in a company and you're forced into that corner and you can't get them to turn around, then leave. It just isn't worth it. A friend of mine owns, at this time, one of the largest cattle ranches in the whole country, and it happens to be in Nevada. But he grew up and I went to high school with him. And in fact, he's been the head of the National Cattlemen's Association. But one time early in his career, he shook hands on a deal to take delivery of a bunch of cows. And before he could take delivery, the bottom dropped out of the market. And he took delivery of them anyway because he had his handshake. Not in the contract that anybody could have enforced. It almost broke him. He came within a hair of bankruptcy. And I said, why'd you do that, John? He says, your reputation is things like fine silver. Never let it tarnish. And if I'd have blown that one, I could never have lived with myself. He went on to prove that he was right, and as I say, he now owns one of the largest cattle ranches in the country. Very successful guy. Second one is ask for advice. Most people are smarter than you think. If you're in a company, if you want to learn something, go down in the trenches and talk to the people who do the day-to-day work. Very often, they have some great ideas, but nobody ever asks them. And they've been doing it for some time. They don't need necessarily a formal education to figure that one out. Third one, praise coworkers both in public and in private. We all feel appreciated, and we work harder when we do feel appreciated. Fourth, chastise in private. Don't embarrass your coworkers in front of everybody else. Shortcut, just read Matthew 18:15. 5, share with those in the organization who helped make it a success. In 1992, we took Life Free public. We put it on the New York Stock Exchange. I gave stock to every single employee in the company, right down to the mailroom boys. You know what happened? They turned from employees into owners. The guys down there would figure out ways to save money. Instead of going out and buying expensive notepads, they made them up of used old stationery that had the wrong addresses and things on them. They did everything, and suddenly not so many pencils were disappearing. But more importantly, everybody was proud of the organization because they were owners. I suspect 3 or 4 of you in this room are LDS. Learn something from church organization. I'm a convert to the church. One of the things that helped me in growing over the years in business was learning the example of watching how organizations are run. It has nothing to do with theology, it has to do with organization. There's a bishop and 2 counselors, there's a stake president and 2 counselors, you go all up and down the whole organization, Relief Society and so forth. If you're not LDS, pay attention, because you can use the concept. It's good to have counselors, one on the right and one on the left, to keep you on the right track. You may get to make the ultimate decision, but you'll learn much from that. 3 heads are better than 1. And at home, 2 heads, and your wife has the extra one, and so you just say yes. Be of service to others. It's not only the right thing to do, but it will keep you in the proper perspective. 8, the business world is small. It's smaller than you think. Be fair, be loyal, be nice, and be slow to burn bridges. Be slow to anger. It's incredible how your paths will crisscross over the years. Your competitor today may well be your boss tomorrow, or perhaps the purchasing agent for your best customer. 9, keep a people file or a notebook on names and addresses and company affiliations on those you meet. It's amazing how often you can network back over the years if you have that information where you can get to it. 10, remember that the money you earn isn't really yours. You are only a steward. Even J. Paul Getty and Aristotle Onassis didn't take it with them. And neither will Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, or Donald Trump. And the last thing, it's a simple trick to improve your effectiveness. Before you go to bed at night, take a 3x5 card. Well, I'm talking to the wrong crowd. Get out your handheld computer and make some notes of what the 5 most important things that you want to accomplish tomorrow. And then go to sleep, and when you wake up on the next day, simply go do them. Now, there's one other principle I'd like to teach you before I head to the questions. If you want to be successful in interpersonal relations and successful negotiation, even success in understanding your spouse or your boss or your employees, and that's this principle, that every single person on the earth is the center of their own universe, and they have no other choice. Each of us is the sum total of our own experiences, our own knowledge of our own environment. This is who we are. No two people are the same, even if they're siblings, raised in the same environment, because their relationships are different. It is from this unique composite base that each one of us reacts to any new situation. We can only look out from the center of who we are and respond. Now, if that's true, the person you're dealing with, your boss or your competitor or whomever it is, then you better stop and think and not be in such a hurry. You better stop talking and spend more time listening and more time asking questions, more time understanding where the other person is coming from before launching into your own sales pitch or your argument or your proposed solution. I particularly learned that from a wonderful man named Don Staley. He recently died. He was the former chairman and CEO of Continental Grain. And we sat on some councils together. He was a counselor to mine when I was a stake president, if that means anything to anybody in the room. It means I needed a lot of help. And what I learned from him is he knew where everybody in the room was and what their position was and what their input was before he made a decision on what was right. He wanted to have the benefit of everything that was going on. He realized that when the other person spoke, they meant what they said, they believed what they said, and it should be taken seriously. He didn't have to agree with them, but he needed to know where they were coming from. And I've utilized that ever since. So now if every single person you meet can only look at the world through their own eyes, then stop and think and then go from there. So the great salesmen, the great negotiators, and the great leaders understand this principle and treat others with respect. And more often they succeed by first listening, by seeing these issues. One last thing before we go to questions. I learned a lesson when I went to a track meet, a teenage track meet a few years ago. It was at West Point. West Point, if you've ever been there, is on the banks of the Hudson River. It's a gorgeous place. The football stadium and the track is right, and you look from the stands out across the river to the beautiful trees. In fact, at this time of year, in the next few weeks, it's incredibly beautiful. Well, this happened to be in the spring, and we're having this teenage track meet, and the 16 to 18-year-olds line up to do the 440 just once around the track. And as always, every year when they do this, the lacrosse players and the basketball players and the track people and the baseball and the football players, they always win. But everybody gets in it, the band members and the chess players and whoever wants to get in, they run. Around they go. And this year was no different than any other, and away they went. The gun goes off, bang. It doesn't take long to get around. First thing, here come the athletes coming across, then the band members, then the other. And I look across towards the river, and there's a young man stumbling and struggling, doing everything he can to make it around. By this time, he's halfway around, and all the athletes have already crossed, and here come the others. And here he kept stumbling and struggling and straggling along. He was clear around in front of the stands before I finally recognized who he was. He was a young man who had been born both physically handicapped and a bit emotionally and mentally handicapped. But he had the gift of love. About this time, as he's come down the last 100 yards, the straightaway, the others who'd all finished turned around and saw him coming. And they turned around and waited for him. And as he went over the finish line with a grin from here to here, the cheers went up. Everybody cheering this guy. You'd have thought he'd won a gold medal, and in a way, perhaps he had. I learned a lesson that day, and that is that maybe the winning is in the finishing. And that maybe when we finish this life, if we've remembered to make a difference, that the people we meet on the other side and the number of people we'll meet may be in direct proportion to the number of those that we've made a difference to here on this side of the veil. It's fun to be in business. There are a lot of exciting things, and you can help a lot of people. When you get through, I would hope that this place is a better place than you found it. Thank you very much. So if someone wants to ask some questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. If I can't answer them, I'll make up something and we'll... I can't see very well. The lights are in my eyes, so if you want to just stand up and... I guess I put them all to sleep. There's one, please.
Where are you from when you grow up?
The question was, where am I from and where did I grow up? I grew up in a little town called Marsing, Idaho. It's on the Snake River in southwestern Idaho. It's in a county called Owyhee County, of which is larger than Rhode Island, and there are only 2,000 people in it. And I went from there west to school and ultimately east to school.
Another question is, what inspired you to be a business leader?
Getting married and having to feed my family. Well, I was a political science major at Stanford. As I'm graduating, it occurred to me that, what am I going to do with this? There are not too many sciences that I could politicize. So I'd always known that I wanted to do sales. And so I looked around for an opportunity to do that. And I stumbled into one in Boise, Idaho, working for a guy named J. Richard Clark and another one named L. Alden Porter, who later came on to move to Utah and be involved in church activities here. I was not a member of the church at that time. And I became somewhat successful in the insurance business. I was a member of the $1 Million Round Table and all that sort of thing. But my clients were young guys that had been to the Harvard and Stanford business schools. And my wife said, they're not that much smarter than you are, or maybe you need the extra experience. But anyway, I decided to go back to school, and because it looked like they were having more fun than I was. And so I just went back to school, and then, you know, I had 4 children and 6, and you do what you need to do. Yes, sir.
I just got one last question. If you were to do everything over again, like you were in our shoes, what would you do? What would you learn, or what did you learn, and what would you go into?
Interesting question, because I can't claim any great planning. You're not BYU, but I'm going to say it anyway. I follow the Spirit. I believe in prayer. I think there's a relationship between earth and the other side. And when I have to make a major decision, I pray hard about it. And I follow the direction I'm given. And it's been like that. I didn't, for instance, when I was coming out of graduate school, I did some interviewing, but I just felt myself moving in one direction, and I felt myself moving a different direction. And then it's just, you have to be determined that you're going to do it. Nobody else is responsible for you but you. And so don't look over your shoulder to have somebody save you all the time. So you just got to decide. And you don't have to know now what you're going to do when you graduate necessarily. Now, my son wanted to be a doctor for a long, long time. The ironic thing is, after he got through medical school and started down that path, he was a full-fledged licensed doctor and so forth. He decided he wanted to be a businessman, so he goes back to school. And now he's using his business training and his MBA and his medical thing to work in business with medical technology. Now, when he started out, he didn't know he was going to do that. So you just take advantage of your opportunities as you go. You got to be awake. You got to pay attention. There's one right here.
I bet I speak for a lot of people in here, just as far as the economy is. A lot of students, getting near towards graduation, starting to, prepare to start marketing sports companies. Is there any advice that you'd give us as far as, just getting out there, trying to land a good job, trying to catch a break right out of school, and, pursuing that career choice?
It's a great question, not an easy question about, what do you do when you first, if you're graduating, you're looking for a job. So I would think that there's some things that you think you're better at than other things. So think through very carefully what you think those are and how you could add something to somebody else's organization if you're going to go to work for somebody else. There's always room in the sales field, but everybody can't be a salesman. When you go to interview for a job, think long and hard about what they do and what you can do to contribute to making the place better and more efficient. And be willing to be flexible. This is no time to be demanding the highest of anything. Your job is to get a toehold in there and then go prove it, and then work your fanny off. And really become, when you get in an organization, you determined you're going to be the most important person they've hired recently. Be the first one there and the last one to leave sometimes. Doesn't have to be all the time, but it's very interesting. If the office opens at 8 o'clock in the morning, if you're there at 1:45, you're going to beat most of the people there. They'll probably think you've been there half the night, but anyway. But it just shows that you care enough. And I wouldn't be watching the clock at 5 either. You get a lot more work done when the phones quit ringing. I don't know if that helps or not, but also this is a great time to start things. There are great opportunities during this crunchy time. Oh, there's one over here, sorry.
While you were talking, you said that it's generally more profitable to buy an existing company than to do your own startup. What situations would you be able to think of where a startup could be more profitable than purchasing what's already running?
Well, if you have a unique idea nobody's ever had before, then you don't have a choice. You might do that. I can just say that most of the money I've lost over the years has been trying to do startups. Whereas if they're already somewhat successful and they just need some tinkering and some fixing and maybe some additional management or some maneuvering, that makes a difference. Example, I've got involved in a consumer products company right now, and I've got millions of dollars in the doggone thing. The product itself is very good, but it's got hammered by this economy and some things. I don't know if we're going to make it or not. One behind you there, yes.
So would you say that entering into like a franchise new in an area is better than entering into a franchise that's already been in the area?
Well, it depends on what it is, of course. We got lucky because Five Guys Burgers and Fries is one of the fastest growing franchises and most successful in that particular area. But if you wanted to start another pizza joint, there are lots of them already, but there are also lots of hamburger places. So what makes this one work is it happens to be one of the very best ones that they've spent 25 years refining and keeping simple. There are no freezers in the building. There are no heat lamps. There are no microwaves. It's all fresh food. And so they were able to move into an area with that after they've perfected it. They refused to do milkshakes. When the boys brought this thing to me, I said, I can't have a hamburger without a milkshake. They said, yeah, but it's ice cream, it's freezers, it takes time, it's messy, and the margins aren't there, and there's all the cleanup you've got to go through with the thing. Sell them water and soda, and it goes through like that. We don't sell coffee, we don't sell tea. It's not a religious thing, it's a process thing. We say simply, hamburgers, hot dogs. By the way, the hot dogs are great. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I saw a hand.
I think I better cut in here because Mr. Hawes has a lunch he needs to attend. Unfortunately, it's not at Five Burgers, but we'll try to find something suitable around here. But Mr. Hawes, if you wouldn't mind coming back up here, we'd just like to thank you today for your time and efforts on our behalf. We'd just like to offer you a little token, a little appreciation gift for your time here today and the gift that you've given to our students and to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, appreciate it. Good luck, guys.